The warning light blinked across the control panel of the cargo vessel Northwind, a lonely ship drifting in the outer rim of space. Captain Reed leaned forward, narrowing his tired eyes at the faint signal that kept flashing. It was not a trade beacon. It was not a mining marker either. It was something older, weaker, as if the stars themselves were whispering a cry for help. For a long moment he sat still in his worn-out pilot seat, listening to the hum of his engines and the silence. Around him, out here in the forgotten corridors of the galaxy, distress calls were almost always a trap. Raiders often left them behind, waiting for some unlucky soul to wander close. Yet something about the signal felt different. It was broken, faint, almost childlike in its rhythm. And Reed's instincts, those same instincts that had carried him through the war years, urged him to follow it. He sighed, rubbed the scars across his hand, and spoke into the quiet room. One more risk, just one more. His voice echoed in the empty ship. He adjusted course and set the Northwind toward the source that it took him nearly 2 hours to reach. The drifting vessel. The closer he came, the clearer the picture grew. A battered transport freighter, its hull blackened and torn by heavy fire. Once it must have been a proud ship, but now it floated helplessly near the edge of a dying star system, where the light of the star burned red and dim. Reed scanned for life signs, expecting nothing, but the monitor flickered back with a shockingly faint reading. Someone was alive in there. He docked the Northwind to the wreck with steady hands. He told himself he was only checking for salvage, but he knew better. Even after years of war and betrayal, he could not ignore a life clinging to survival. He pulled his old helmet over his head, stepped through the airlock, and entered the broken ship. The corridors were filled with smoke and silence. Bulkheads had collapsed, wires hung loose, and the smell of burned metal lingered. Reed's boots echoed softly as he moved. He switched on his hand torch, brushing it across the ruined walls. He saw signs of panic everywhere: abandoned packs, scorched doors forced shut, claw marks where someone had tried to escape. His jaw tightened. He had seen it before. A massacre dot at the heart of the ship, behind a half-broken door. He found the survivors. They were children, 6 of them, no older than 12 in human years, crouched together in the dim light of a ruined storage bay. Their faces were strange, with soft silver markings along their temples and large dark eyes that reflected the beam of his torch. Their clothes were torn, their bodies thin from hunger, and when they saw him, their eyes widened with a terror that pierced straight through his chest. One of them hissed in their own tongue, pulling the younger ones behind. Reed froze, raising both his hands slowly, keeping his voice gentle. "It's all right. I'm not here to hurt you." His words sounded too big in the silence. The children pressed tighter against the wall, shaking, whispering to each other in broken sounds. He recognized the fear. They had been hunted. They had been taught that strangers meant death. He lowered his voice, softening it as much as he could. "I'm human. My name is Reed. I came because of your signal. I want to help." One of the older children, perhaps a girl, stepped forward slightly. Her eyes, sharp but trembling, searched his face. She looked like she wanted to believe him, but could not. She shook her head and pointed at his chest, muttering words he did not know. Reed understood enough. She had seen humans in war. She did not trust them. Reed slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar. He unwrapped it, took a bite himself, then placed it carefully on the floor and pushed it toward them. The youngest child, a boy with a scar across his cheek, stared at the food with wide eyes. Hunger broke fear, and he crawled forward, snatched it, and stuffed it into his mouth. The others gasped, whispering, but no harm came. Slowly, the older girl's expression shifted from suspicion to a flicker of desperate hope. Reed's chest ached at the sight. He crouched down, speaking softly. "There's no one left here. This ship won't fly again. You'll die if you... Stay, come with me, my ship can take you somewhere safe. The girl hesitated, but she looked at the little ones. One was crying softly, another lay weak against the wall, barely able to move. She finally gave a single sharp nod. That was all Reed needed. He guided them back through the broken corridors, carrying the weakest in his arms. Their small heads rested against his chest, their fragile bodies trembling. He could feel every bone. He wondered how long they had been hiding, how long they had survived alone in the dark. Back on the Northwind, he settled them in the small crew quarters, giving them blankets and more food. The children sat close together, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes, not sure whether to see him as savior or captor. Reed did not press them. He only smiled faintly and told them to eat. As he turned back to the control deck, his scanners blared a warning. A fleet had entered the system. Reed's blood ran cold as the signature flashed across the screen. Raiders, the same kind that had likely destroyed the children's transport. They were hunting, sweeping across the dead ship's trail, and now they had found him. Reed gripped the controls. His heart pounded with the old rhythm of war, but this time the stakes were different. It was not his life alone. It was theirs. The children, frightened and fragile, had no one else. For the first time in years, Reed felt a heavy weight settle across his shoulders. He spoke softly into the silence, more to himself than anyone else. If they want you, they'll have to go through me. The stars outside lit with the flash of approaching ships. The hunt had begun. The Northwind shuddered as Captain Reed pushed its engines to their limit. The warning alarms kept screaming, flashing red across the cabin, but his hands remained steady on the controls. Behind him, in the small crew quarters, the children huddled together. Their frightened whispers carried through the thin walls of the ship, and he could almost feel their fear pressing against his back. Reed had been in many fights before, but this one was different. He was no longer alone. Through the wide screen, the darkness of space was broken by the sharp glimmer of enemy ships. The raiders were swift, lean vessels designed only for the hunt. They had faster engines and stronger weapons than his old cargo hauler, and Reed knew he could not simply outrun them. Still he tried. He threaded the Northwind through the drifting rocks of an asteroid belt, his eyes sharp, every muscle tense. Each movement reminded him of the war years when he flew in battles he never wanted to fight but always survived. The raiders closed in, their signals crawling closer on his scanners. Reed's jaw clenched. He knew the children were watching him, waiting to see what kind of man he truly was. They had already lost everything, and if he failed them now, their lives would end in the same silence as their people's. When the first blast of enemy fire struck the side of the Northwind, the ship rocked so violently that one of the younger children cried out in terror. Reed quickly hit the intercom and spoke, keeping his voice steady. "Stay calm, I've got you. I won't let them take you." His words were short, but in them was a promise. He guided the ship through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. The enemy fire missed by inches, sparking across the rocks. He twisted and pulled the controls, forcing the heavy hauler into moves it was never meant to make. The engines roared and groaned in protest, but the Northwind obeyed its captain. For a moment, Reed thought he had gained some distance. The scanner flickered with empty space, and he let out a breath he did not realize he was holding. Then a sharp beep warned him again. More ships had joined the chase, blocking the path ahead. The raiders were tightening their net. Reed's mind raced. He could fight, but his weapons were outdated and weak. He could flee, but they would always be faster. The only chance he had was to outthink them, to play the game as he had done long ago. He steered hard to the left, diving deeper into the asteroid field where the rocks spun endlessly, colliding with each other. A dangerous place, but also a shield. The children felt every twist and turn of the ship. In the quarters, the older girl Lyra, though Reed had only caught her name in the brief exchange, held the youngest close to her chest. She whispered softly in her own tongue, a lullaby perhaps, or a prayer. Her eyes never left the door, waiting for the moment it might open and bring either safety or death. Reed fought to keep the ship from smashing into the drifting stone giants. The raiders followed, some too reckless, and he smiled grimly when one of them miscalculated and tore itself apart on a rock. But for each one lost, 3 more pressed forward. Their weapons spat fire that shook the Northwind again and again. Warning lights flared. Hull damage. Power drain. Reed gritted his teeth and kept going. A sudden memory came back to him, uninvited. The war. A similar chase. He remembered the orders from commanders who cared nothing for the lives on board, only for victory. He remembered the screams of families caught in the crossfire. He remembered swearing to himself after it all ended that he would never again fight for anyone but himself. And yet here he was, throwing his life between a pack of killers and a handful of alien children who did not even trust him. The ship jolted as another blast struck near the engines. Sparks flew across the control panel. The alarms screamed louder. Reed's hand slammed down on the emergency switch, forcing the auxiliary systems to take over. He cursed under his breath but kept control. He did not have time to doubt or fear. The children were counting on him. Through the intercom, a small voice crackled. It was hesitant, broken, but clear enough. "Captain, are we safe?" It was the youngest boy, the one who had eaten the ration bar first. Reed did not look away from the screen, but his voice softened. "Not yet, but I promise I'll get you there." His eyes flicked to the edge of the star system, where the faint light of the dying sun glowed red. If he could reach the shadow of its collapsing gravity field, maybe, just maybe, he could lose. The raiders, it was a risk. The unstable pull of the star could crush his ship just as easily as it could destroy his enemies. But he had no other choice. The chase dragged on, a deadly dance among the asteroids. Reed felt the ship growing weaker. Every warning light screaming at him. His heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He had to keep moving. He had to keep them alive. At last, the asteroids thinned, and the dying sun loomed before them, its swollen body trembling with unstable energy. The raiders hesitated for a moment, wary of the danger, but their greed drove them forward. They wanted the children. They wanted whatever secret the young survivors carried. Reed knew then that this was more than just a rescue. Something about these children made the raiders aspirate. He had seen that kind of hunger in men before. It was not just bloodlust. It was something else. He pushed the thought aside for now. Survival came first. The Northwind groaned as it skimmed the edge of the gravity field. The scanners went wild, warning him of unstable forces. The raiders followed close behind, firing relentlessly. Another strike tore across the hull, and Reed tasted blood as he bit down on his lip. The ship could not take much more. He steadied. His breathing, his eyes fixed on the burning star ahead. The children needed him. If he faltered, if he gave up, they would be lost. He forced every ounce of skill he had left into his hands, guiding the ship through the storm of light and gravity. Behind him, the children clung to one another in silence, their trust hanging by the thinnest of threads. But in that silence, Reed felt something stir. A bond forming, fragile yet real. They were beginning to believe in him. And that was enough to keep him fighting. The raiders drew closer, weapons charging for a final strike. Reed wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart pounding like a drum. One choice lay before him. Fight, flee, or fall, and he knew he would not abandon them. Not now. Not ever. The Northwind limped through the unstable shadow of the dying star. its engine straining against the pull of gravity. Reed kept his hands firm on the controls, forcing the ship forward, while the raiders struggled to follow in the turbulence. It gave him a brief window to breathe, though the damage across his ship was severe. Every alarm reminded him that he could not run forever. At best, he had bought a little more time, but sooner or later, the enemy would catch up. He rose from his seat and walked back to the crew quarters. The children sat huddled together, their large dark eyes fixed on him. They had eaten a little of the rations he provided, but their faces still showed the hollow look of hunger and fear. Lyra, the older girl, stood protectively in front of the others, her chin lifted as if she were daring him to prove whether he was a friend or foe. Reed respected that defiance. It was the look of someone who had lost everything, but still refused to break. He crouched down, meeting their eyes at their level. "We are not safe yet," he said quietly. "Those ships out there will not stop. I need to know why. Why would they chase children across half the sector? What is it they want from you?" The children exchanged uneasy glances. Lyra lowered her eyes, clearly struggling with the decision. Reed waited. He had learned long ago that trust could not be forced. After a long silence, she reached into the folds of her tattered clothes and pulled out a small object. She held it close at first, as though afraid the air itself might steal it away, then slowly extended it toward him. It was a crystal, no larger than Reed's palm, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. The glow pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat, and when Reed leaned closer, he thought he heard a faint hum, a sound that stirred something deep inside his chest. "This is what they want," Lyra whispered, her voice carrying a weight far beyond her years. "It is called the heart. It is all that is left of our home." Reed frowned, studying the object. It was unlike anything he had seen in his years of travel. "What do you mean, all that is left?" Lyra's eyes shone with tears, but her voice did not break. "Our world was burned. The raiders destroyed. Our cities, our people, everything. But before the end, the elders placed the memory of our planet into this. Its rivers, its forests, even the voices of our ancestors. If it is kept safe, there is hope that we might rebuild. If they take it, they will use it to finish what they started. We will be gone forever." The room fell silent. The younger children clung to one another, their small faces turned toward Reed with fear and hope tangled together. For the first time, Reed understood the true weight of what he had stumbled into. He was not only protecting a handful of frightened survivors. He was carrying the last spark of an entire civilization. He sat back slowly, the memory of his own war pressing down on him. He had seen worlds burned before, but to hear it from a child's lips made the pain sharper. He had walked away from war because he believed nothing could be saved. But here was proof that something still could. Lyra watched him carefully, as if trying to read the truth in his face. "You could give us to them," she said quietly. "You could trade us for your life. Maybe they would let you go." Reed let out a rough laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You don't know me yet," he said. "But I'll tell you this. I've spent too many years watching the strong prey on the weak. I swore I was done fighting, but I cannot stand by and see you lost. If they want you, they'll have to go through me." Something shifted in the children then. It was small, but Reed felt it. Their eyes no longer looked at him with the same sharp suspicion. A thin thread of trust had begun to form. The youngest boy, the one who had spoken through the intercom, crawled closer and placed his tiny hand on Reed's knee. It was a silent answer, a gesture that told him his promise mattered. Reed stayed with them for a while, answering their questions as best he could, telling them about the stars, about the safe colonies that still existed far beyond this system. He saw their eyes widen with wonder, a fragile spark breaking through the heavy shadow of fear. When they grew tired, he let them rest, but Lyra remained awake, her gaze steady. "You do not owe us this," she said softly. Reed looked at her, seeing the weight she carried as a child forced to be older than her years. "Maybe I do," he replied. "Maybe this is the one thing I was meant to do." When he returned to the cockpit, the scanner showed the raiders regrouping. They had not given up. His ship was badly wounded, and he knew the next encounter could be the last. But now, for the first time in many years, Reed felt something he thought had died in him purpose. As the north wind crept along the edge of the dying star, the crystal's soft hum echoed faintly in his mind. It was more than an object. It was alive in its own way, carrying the memory of a people who refused to vanish. He wondered if it could sense his resolve, if it knew that he would fight for it as fiercely as the children. He thought of the message it carried, a chance to rebuild, a chance to begin again. It reminded him of something he had forgotten long ago, that survival was not enough, that there had to be hope beyond the struggle. And as the raiders drew nearer once more, Captain Reed knew he would carry that hope, no matter the cost. The alarms flared again. The hunt was far from over. But now Reed had more than fear in his heart. He had a reason to fight. And the raiders would soon learn that there was nothing more dangerous in the galaxy than a human with something worth protecting. The north wind carried on like a wounded beast, dragging itself through the storm of gravity that bent space around the dying star. Reed's hands never left the controls, though his body ached from the long chase and the countless hours without rest. The children were quiet in the back, worn out from fear and hunger, yet he could still feel their eyes on him, the silent weight of their trust. He had promised them safety, and promises were not things to break. The scanners blinked red again. The raiders had regrouped, weaving their fast ships into formation. They were patient hunters, waiting for the right moment to strike. Reed knew their kind. They would toy with him, let him run until the ship had no strength left, then close in for the kill. His cargo hauler could not fight them head-on, but the dying star around them was more dangerous than any weapon, and Reed realized he could use it. He studied the unstable mass of fire and gas that loomed ahead. Streams of molten light twisted out from its core, pulling debris into its burning grasp. A misstep here meant certain death, but Reed's mind worked quickly. If he could lead the raiders closer, if he could make them reckless, perhaps the star would swallow them. It was a plan built on risk, and yet it was the only chance left. He turned the ship toward the blazing light. The children stirred as the vessel shook violently, and Reed opened the intercom. His voice was steady, though his chest was heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. "Listen to me. Things are going to get rough. You'll feel the ship twist and shake, but you must not be afraid. Stay together. No matter what happens, trust me." There was a pause, then Lyra's voice came back, small but strong. "We trust you." Those 3 words struck Reed harder than any enemy fire. It had taken only hours for them to shift from fear to faith, but in that time something had changed inside him as well. He was no longer running only to save them. He was running because they had given him back something he had long forgotten: belief. Raiders closed in, their ships firing blasts that shook the hull. Sparks leapt from the control panel, filling the cabin with the smell of burned circuits. Reed forced the north wind into a dive, skimming so close to the star's pull that the metal frame screamed in protest. Warning lights burst across his screen, but he did not waver. He felt the same sharp focus that had carried him through countless battles, the strange calm that came only when the choice was clear: fight or die. The children, feeling the ship twist and lurch, pressed against each other. The youngest cried out, but Lyra held him tight and whispered Reed's words back to him. "Trust, he will not leave us." Reed glanced at the scanner. The raiders were still there, hungry, fearless, certain they would corner him at last. He gritted his teeth and whispered under his breath, "Come closer, you bastards." He pulled, The ship lower, deeper into the storm of fire. The heat shimmered across the viewports, the glare burning like a second sun. His skin prickled with sweat, but he held the course. One of the raider ships, too eager, pushed forward and slipped too close to the unstable edge. Reed watched as it was caught in a sudden pull, dragged helplessly into the blazing heart of the star. A burst of light swallowed it whole. The children gasped at the flash, and Reed's lips tightened in grim satisfaction. One gone, but too many still remained. The others learned from the mistake, staying further back, firing from a safer distance. Reed cursed under his breath. They were clever, not reckless enough to all fall into his trap. He needed to give them a reason to chase him closer, something that would blind them with rage. He thought of the crystal the children carried, the so-called heart of their world. The raiders wanted it so badly, they were willing to risk everything. Perhaps that greed could be their undoing. He opened the intercom again. "Lyra, bring me the crystal." There was hesitation, then footsteps. Lyra entered the cockpit, clutching the glowing stone to her chest. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the fire of the star outside. Reed held out his hand. She did not move at first, but then slowly, with a trembling grip, she placed the crystal in his palm. It pulsed with light, alive in a way that made his skin prickle. He raised it toward the viewport, letting its glow shine through the front of the ship. The raiders noticed. Their formation shifted, their ships darting closer like wolves catching the scent of prey. Reed smirked faintly. "That's it. Come and take it." He pulled the ship even lower, so close to the burning mass that the hull began to rattle from the heat. The north wind was never meant to fly in such a place, and Reed knew he was pushing it beyond its limit. Alarms screamed, metal groaned, and the children cried out as the ship shook violently. But the raiders followed, unable to resist. The lure of the heart. Another burst of fire shot from their guns, striking the north wind and tearing a deep wound across its side. Reed almost lost control as the ship spun, but he slammed his hand against the stabilizer, forcing it back into line. His body ached from the force, but his eyes never left the path ahead. The gravity of the star reached out like an invisible hand pulling at the ships. Reed guided the north wind upward at the last second, scraping past the edge of destruction. The raiders were not as quick. Two of their ships veered too close, their engines failing against the pull, and in a heartbeat, they were dragged into the inferno. The children cheered through their fear, hope sparking in their eyes for the first time. Reed felt a surge of strength from their voices. They believed, truly believed, and that gave him the courage to push on. But he also knew the cost of what he was doing. His ship was breaking apart, piece by piece. To finish this, he would have to make a choice no one wanted to make. He glanced at Lyra, still standing beside him, holding onto the chair for balance. Her eyes were full of fear, but also something brighter. "You're going to save us," she whispered. Reed nodded once, though his throat was dry. "Yes, but not without a price." His plan was dangerous, almost certain to cost him his life, but he did not care. The children deserved to live. Their world deserved to rise again. And if his death could give them that chance, then it was a price he was ready to pay. He set the course deeper toward the heart of the collapsing star, his mind already calculating the final maneuver. The children would survive, the raiders would not. And he would make sure of it. The north wind groaned like a dying beast as Captain Reed forced it toward the burning light of the collapsing star. Every alarm blared across the cockpit. Every panel flashed with warnings, but he ignored them all. His eyes stayed locked on the scanners, on the sharp red shapes of the raider ships that clung stubbornly to his trail. His plan had taken shape in his mind, simple and final. There was no way back from it, but that did not matter. What mattered was that the children would live. Lyra stood beside him, her small hands gripping the edge of the chair as the ship rattled and shook. She did not speak, but her eyes searched his face as though trying to understand what he intended. Reed felt the weight of her gaze, and for a moment he wished he could lie, wished he could promise that he would walk away from this alive. But lies had no place now. He reached out and touched the controls of the escape pod docked at the rear of the ship. His voice was steady when he spoke, though his chest ached with every word. Listen carefully. You and the others will take the pod. It will carry you far enough from the star to be picked up by the neutral colonies. I've set the course already. All you need to do is close the hatch and hold on. Lyra's head shook quickly. No, you must come with us. Reed met her eyes and gave a faint smile, the kind that tried to soften the truth. The pod cannot hold all of you and me, and someone has to guide this ship. Someone has to make sure the raiders don't follow. That someone is me. Her lips parted as if to protest, but Reed raised his hand. You're stronger than you think. You've carried them this far. Now you must lead them the rest of the way. Do you understand? Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded slowly. Reed placed the glowing crystal back in her hands, closing her small fingers around it. The pulsing light reflected on her face, bathing her in the memory of her lost world. Keep it safe. This is your future. Do not let it die. She swallowed hard and whispered, We will remember you. Reed turned back to the controls, his jaw set. That's all I ask. The children were gathered into the pod, their frightened faces peering out at him one last time. The youngest boy reached out with both hands as if to cling to him, but Lyra pulled him close and whispered to him until he obeyed. Reed sealed the hatch with his own hands, the sound echoing like the closing of a door between two worlds. He pressed the launch switch, and with a low rumble, the pod detached. Drifting free into the blackness of space. He watched the small shape vanish across the scanners, carrying their hope with it. Only then did he allow himself to lean back in his seat and breathe. He was alone now, and it felt strangely calm. The fear was gone, replaced with a heavy peace. The raiders still chased, their ships darting around him like vultures around a carcass. Reed adjusted the controls, drawing them closer, deeper into the gravity well of the dying star. The light filled the cockpit, blinding and pure. Sweat rolled down his face, but his hands never faltered. He pushed the Northwind harder, forcing its failing engines into one final surge. The raiders followed greedily, desperate to claim the crystal they believed was still aboard. When Reed was sure they were close enough, he locked the controls and engaged the autopilot sequence he had set. The Northwind would dive straight into the heart of the star, dragging the hunters with it. Reed leaned back and let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. The end was near, but it was the kind of end he could accept. Before the final moment, he reached for the old recorder built into the console. His voice was low, but steady. This is Captain Reed of the Northwind. To the ones who find this, know that I did not fall in vain. I carried the last children of a broken world, and I gave them the only gift I could time. If they are alive, when you hear this, then my work is done. To the children, you're not alone anymore. Live, that's all I ask. He set the recorder to broadcast on a beacon, then closed his eyes for a brief moment. Memories came, unbidden faces of comrades lost, the sound of laughter from years before the war, the endless stars he had traveled alone. For the first time in years, the memories did not feel like chains. They felt like release. The light outside grew unbearable as the Northwind plunged toward the star. The raiders tried to pull away at the last second, but the gravity held them fast, dragging them into the same doom. Reed's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Not today, he whispered, and then the world turned white. Far away, the escape pod drifted into calmer space. Inside, The children clung together, their small bodies pressed close. Lyra held the crystal tight to her chest, her eyes locked on the fading blaze where the stars swallowed Reed's ship. She did not cry. She sat straight, her chin lifted, her heart heavy but strong. The others looked to her, and she whispered words in their own tongue. Words that meant they were not finished, that their people's spirit lived on. Hours later, a neutral colony patrol found them. The pod was hauled aboard, and the children were led into safety at last. At first, the colonists hesitated, wary of taking in refugees from a hunted race. But when Lyra spoke of Reed, of the human captain who gave his life for them, their doubts faded. The crystal glowed in her hands, and its light filled the hall like a promise. In the weeks that followed, the children began to heal. They were given shelter, food, and a chance to start anew. Lyra grew into her role as their leader, guiding them with the strength Reed had seen in her from the beginning. She never let the others forget his final words. She repeated them often, as though carving them into their hearts. Live. That was the command he had left them. And so they lived. They carried forward not only the memory of their world, but also the spirit of a human who had stood between them and doom. To them, Captain Reed was more than a savior. He was proof that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, there could still be love, sacrifice, and hope. And though his ship was gone, though his body was swallowed by the fire of a dying star, his story burned brighter than ever, carried in the hearts of alien children who would never forget the man who made them believe again. The end.